So my name is Charles Briggs. I'm the interim director of the Institute for the Study of Societal Issues, and we are honored to be here today with Dean Rachel Moran. And so thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Well, um, your career has included a number of appointments, both at Berkeley, but also at UC Irvine, Texas A&M, and at UCLA. And the last one included your being the dean of the law school there. Your work has illuminated intersections between race and law, Latino-related health, law and policy, legal education, the role of education in the family and producing inequities, and so much more. Our focus today is on your 5 years as director of the Institute, and which was known as the Institute for the Study of Social Change at the time, and particularly for the way in which you gave a formal launch to the Graduate Fellows Program. But I wonder if you could give people who may not know you very well just some insights into your life, specifically what motivated you to take on this kind of research, teaching, and academic leadership?
Well, when I was a child in elementary school, I was walking down the hall and a teacher said, Such a bright girl, too bad. There's no future for her. And in that moment, it felt very bad to be written off before you're 8 years old. But what happened between the time of her observation or her prediction and the time that I applied to college was that the landscape of opportunity was shifting under my feet. And I didn't even know it. But when I went to apply to college, there were doors that had been opened through the civil rights movement, through federal policy, through state policy that really had not been opened before in that way. And so I was very fortunate. I went to a summer program in mathematics sponsored by the National Science Foundation. And that's where I learned about how important it was not just to go to college, to go to the right college. And so I ended up at Stanford and eventually ended up on the faculty at Berkeley. Very improbable journey, but it happened. And I think that I wanted to research the questions of opportunity and equality and equity, particularly with a focus on education because of my own experience.
Well, that's wonderful. Thanks so much. Now, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your decision to become the director of the Institute. What moved you to take the position, and what did you hope to accomplish?
Well, going back to this idea of opportunity creation, I took over the Institute at a critical moment, not just in the Institute's history, but the history of the campus and the state of California. We had just had Regents resolutions and a popular referendum, Proposition 209, that ended the use of race or ethnicity in any governmental decisions. Now, before that happened, Berkeley had been the #1 producer of PhDs of color in the country. So we were a huge pipeline into academic teaching. And the Institute had always had a commitment to fostering students from diverse backgrounds who were going to do research on diverse issues. And so it had always kind of assumed that naturally there would be a large pool of people available to benefit from its programs. But now there was a fear that somehow people would be more isolated in their departments, more demoralized in their departments, and it would be harder for them to find each other, their fellow travelers interested in these questions. And so I thought the Institute had a unique potential to address the aftermath of Proposition 209, the end of affirmative action, and its impact on Berkeley as a producer of PhDs of color.
That is a wonderful response for this particular historical juncture, I might say.
Yes, that's true. We now see that that policy has gone national, and we will be seeing probably over the years some changes in the pipeline into the professions and the academy.
That's wonderful. So, Rachel, your work is tremendously transdisciplinary. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about how the Institute's transdisciplinary structure helped it to foster research and conversations that reach beyond the individual disciplinary um, homes of many of its affiliates.
Yeah, well, interdisciplinarity was really in the Institute's DNA. And so I inherited an organization that was committed to interdisciplinary dialogue, but it's always an uphill battle because we live in large universities, they're very siloed, and an individual's prospects are going to stand or fall on what happens in the department. So we had to make interdisciplinarity something that was attractive to people because it would enrich their work. And then when they went back to their departments, it would actually help them to move forward with whatever research projects they were doing. And so it's a very thoughtful way of doing interdisciplinarity where the dialogue is not meant to discredit one discipline or another or challenge the bona fides of one approach over another. No, we've been a big tent, multiple disciplines, multiple methods. And the idea was, but let's listen to each other and see how you can strengthen whatever it is that you're working on because you find the blind spots through someone else's disciplinary perspective. The other thing that I think was very important about the Institute is its intergenerational quality. We had an anniversary and we got to see the different schools of research. And what you always find is that there's one dominant school and then it's challenged by the next generation and then by the next generation. And what we do is build that intergenerational creativity into the Institute because we have a very intense involvement by graduate fellows who are working with experienced faculty. And I think that is both interdisciplinary and intergenerational. And there's a certain magic that happens when both those elements are present.
Well, you put your finger, I think, on the heart of the Institute, which is the Graduate Fellows Program. Tell us a little bit about the role you played in turning that into a real formal institution that would have its a means of being able to preserve itself and continue in the future.
Well, it was interesting because I think people thought of the Graduate Fellows Program as the heart and soul of the Institute. And as we entered this era after Proposition 209, there was a fear that that pipeline wasn't going to be there, that these students would be flattened or excluded. And so it became just that much more important to make sure the Graduate Fellows Program remained vibrant regardless of these changes. So I thought a lot about the program. David Minkus had been running it, but I felt that the program needed to be expanded and structured somewhat differently. Now, one strategic choice that the Institute had made was to target this gap in support for graduate students. You get a lot of support to get you in the door and a lot of support to get you out the door. And then there's this sort of wasteland in the middle. And yet that's a pivotal moment because you move from being a conventional student taking required courses to having to find your own voice and write your thesis. And so we targeted support for those critical years. But what we wanted to do was actually make that support even better. And so we expanded the program to 2 years. So you came in and you did work around your projects, but we also had a second year where you could deepen and refine that work. And we also provided you with more sort of soft skills to enter the market and position yourself within that market. We also diversified the disciplines of the people who ran the program. So we had Christine Trost, who was in political science, and we had Deborah Lustig, who's an anthropologist, and we had David Minkus, a sociologist. So we reflected the interdisciplinarity of the program in the people who ran it. We also created a more structured process to select the fellows. So we had an interdisciplinary committee that actually reviewed applications. It was very competitive. We didn't rely on word of mouth. We had people out there telling about the program, but we really wanted it to come to be a very competitive, prized program. And then the final thing that I think that we did was to create some material resources that would support success. So we had all that human capital, all the social networking, but we also added material resources. So we improved the space for people to work in so they could see this as a sort of a home for their work where they would be able to just, Toni Morrison said, never be afraid to sit a while and think. Well, you could sit a while and think in your workspace at the Institute. And the other thing that we did, because it was 2 years, you got a stipend for 2 years, and we increased the amount of the stipend. We got additional funding thanks to the the vice provost, for additional funding for the stipends. And the idea here was that, you know, graduate students get pulled in a lot of directions just to stay afloat financially. And so we were a place that stood out because we paid you to think about your own ideas, not to help somebody with their ideas or help somebody teach their classes. No, you were the center. And so you had material resources, you had social networks, you had a program of human capital development. And this made this program, I think, very unique. And we did it at a moment when you needed the extra support because it wasn't coming from the departments in the same way that it does at the beginning and end of the program. And by the way, I just want to add, it was very successful. And I would sometimes go into a bookstore and I would see a book that was someone's dissertation, and that person had been a graduate fellow. And I was just so thrilled to see them reach that level. And then they took on great jobs and they've done other important research, but you know, they've done some fabulous work after the program too.
You're certainly very proud of our alumni. And I'll tell you, my own students who become graduate fellows, it has made a tremendous amount of difference for their careers. Now, you've taught at a number of universities, and you've also taken leadership roles in such organizations as the American Association of American Law Schools. So you have got this kind of broad view of universities in the United States. From this perspective, what might you see as sort of the unique features of the Institute and of its graduate fellows program?
Well, I think one unique feature of the Institute has been that it's a safe space.
Mhm.
We are not going to presume against your ideas. We are going to listen openly and receptively to your ideas. We're going to give constructive criticism, but you don't have to justify your existence when you walk in the doors of the Institute.
Mhm.
We are there to help you. I think another really critical feature is the interdisciplinarity. The idea that we can learn across a broad range of disciplines. And because there's a sort of often a common commitment substantively to issues of diversity and change, I think that meant that interdisciplinary conversation was quite coherent. You could intelligibly speak about related issues across disciplinary boundaries. And I think the third facet that's really important is the intergenerationality, the mentoring, the giving of one generation to the next, the tools to question the authority of the prior generation. The idea is we don't want you to just conform to what we did. We want you to make it better. And there's a generosity of spirit in that. And I think a kind of shared idealism in that really are unique to the Institute.
That's great. Thank you, Rachel. Now, a final question. As we speak, universities are under intense attack in the United States. How would you articulate for broader public audiences the importance of supporting organizations like the Institute that promote research on difference, inequity, and social justice?
Well, you know, I started off our conversation talking about opportunity and how, as a child, horizons opened up to me because of a shifting landscape of opportunity. And I think many people are worried that we might be going in the other direction, that instead of creating opportunity, we're finding ways to constrict opportunity. And people who are troubled by this may wonder, what can I do as one individual to make a difference? And I want to tell you that there are many ways to make a difference, but one of them is to support the next generation of scholars who are going to tackle these issues and keep them alive. I know that I had wonderful mentors as a child who believed in me, and therefore I continued to be engaged because I felt that I did have a future. And I think people, you know, will have different ways of responding, but one way to respond is to support those idealistic young people who want to make a difference through their research and their research. They want that research to make a difference. It's also a way to feel happy because you can get engaged in some ways with the work that is going on. And so you can really touch somebody's life. And that's a really great feeling for you and a really marvelous thing for a student. And I have to say, the other thing is, if you support the Institute, you're also sending a message to the campus that it isn't just the people who are at the Institute who care about it, that a broader constituency supports the work. And I think that's an important message as well.
That's very important. Thank you. I guess the only thing I would tack on is there anything that you would like to add?
No, just wanted to thank you, Charles, for taking on this leadership role and helping us to celebrate a major anniversary for the Institute. And I'm looking forward to seeing what comes next.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a real treat to be able to speak with you today. And so with that, we'll conclude. Thanks so much.